When I was very young, my mom taught me that to drink with elegance, one must put their pinky out.
Where ideas come from.
Is that all we're talking about? We're also we're thanking Jared and also talking about scanners?
We're talking about scanners if the idea thing doesn't quite give us enough time. You know what I mean?
I feel like the scanner thing would be a really quick, easy thing to get out of the way first. It's not interesting, but...
We should put it at the end because it might not be very...
Yeah, okay.
This is The Ink Pit, a weekly podcast where three cartoonists of minor note talk about the enchanting life of a person who makes comics and sometimes gets money or nice emails about them. I'm Mike King. I draw a daily comic called Please Keep Warm, and I uploaded 4 comics today, and you can read that at pleasekeepwarm.com. And who else is here?
I'm Dave Mercier, and I do the comic Merkworks at merkworks.net, and it's fantastic.
My name is Rachel Dukes. I'm a cartoonist. I do a webcomic called Frankie Comics about my cat. And I'm also working on my first graphic novel. You can see my work online at mixtapecomics.com.
Sweet. Great. So before we read the emails that are about the same thing that we're talking about today, can we thank Jared Cullum for that beautiful painting?
Yes.
Jared Cullum made this oil painting of all three of us after last week's podcast, and it is gorgeous. Can we put that up on the website or something?
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Okay. But yeah,
cool.
I have made the little painting of me, my icon, on every social media.
Yeah, beautiful.
Like, dude nails it. Does he have a website?
Well, he used to do a comic called Pea Green Coffee Cup, and that's at peagreencoffeecup.com. But he doesn't do it anymore, so I think that's...
He does have an online portfolio that I think is hisname.com.
Jared Cullum.
So you want me to read these emails?
Yeah.
Well, the first one says, "Hey guys, hope all is good. I'm Ian from the United Kingdom. Just wondering, how do you guys go about coming up with your content, as in the storylines and characters? Thanks. P.S. Hopefully one day I can get a sweet snake tattoo from Mike. Check me out on Instagram at Ian Nizzle. That'd be appreciated. All the best." And that's at Ian, Nizzel. And our second email is kind of about the same thing, just idea generation and content, from our good friend Andrew Greenstone, who will be on the podcast next week. Me and Rachel know Andrew.
Hey, Andrew.
He's a sweetheart.
Hey,
He's currently drawing for Regular Show on the comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so next week we'll probably talk about drawing for shows like that in the comic form. But his email is from Andrew. My question for the Ink Pit: how do each of you go about writing a joke? Also, what are your strategies for writing short form versus writing for longer projects? Love and kisses, Andrew.
Who wants to kick us off? Mike, why don't you start? Because your style of writing is so foreign to me.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you've told me before that you write as you go along, as you're illustrating.
Oh yeah, just like right into the panels?
Yeah, you don't have anything planned out before.
Sometimes I'll have like an idea, but a lot of the times like the structure shows up as I'm writing it. Because like if I type it out like on a computer, I'm like, panel 1, Sarah walks into the room. Panel 2, she looks around and thinks about, but like I don't, like once it's done, like it's done in my mind and it's over and I want to move on. So I actually have to like kind of write it as I'm going. Like usually what I'll do is I'll start by drawing just a scene. 2 guys trying to hang up a painting is the first Please Keep Warm thing, and it's like kind of crooked. And like I try to find the humor in those things. It works okay. Sometimes the jokes aren't quite as strong as I'd like them to be, but I think they got more of a spontaneous feel to them.
They do, and I've actually heard a very similar approach used by a guy, Chris Allison, who's one of the guys who does Toon Hall.
Tuna Hole?
Sits down and he just... Toon Hall. It's a great comic.
I thought you said Tuna Hole.
He's Tuna Hole. No. Toon as in cartoon hole.
That still sounds like a porn website.
It does, and sometimes it is. But he sits down and he just will like do really, really rough drafts of. He'll just kind of like stream of consciousness write comics, and he won't finalize anything, but he'll just make 7 or 8. He told me, and then they're all garbage except maybe one, and then he'll use that one to make a comic.
That's what I do, except I post all of them.
Yeah, which is fine. You've got good work. I guess it kind of depends on
the way I've always seen it is like if somebody is intently following me, they're gonna want to see my bad ideas too. That's how I feel. I want to see everything a cartoonist I read does. So I tried that technique, and my bad ideas were so bad that it just didn't get me anywhere. Like I have to sit down and really like think an idea through, and I have to think about it from all these different angles, and kind of. I'm very meticulous in the brainstorming phase. So I just pretty much start. I basically same 4 square boxes all the time right now, just to kind of keep myself going. And I just start drawing in there. Like, what is your what's your process generally like?
I recently did one with Peach and Bowser and Mario, and I knew the only thing I knew about that comic ahead of time was I want Peach to be the main character of this comic because she gets kind of overlooked. I think she's fine. She's a good character. It's the hottest.
Definitely the best Mario Kart character. I remember being 12 years old, always using Peach on 64.
It's pretty funny though. I actually I'm working on the book right now, and I have a scene where they're playing N64 Mario Kart. So I had to go and like watch a bunch of it on YouTube because I don't have a television right now and I don't have an emulator. And watching Peach kick everyone's butts is hilarious.
The fact that Mario 64 isn't permanently burned into your brain is kind of disappointing.
Well, no, the sounds are, but I needed specific shots of like someone, tumbling out after being hit with a blue shell, that sort of thing, that I needed to go get reference for. I watched a playthrough of the whole game last night. It was amazing, and now I'm jonesing really hard for Mario Kart. But I agree that Peach is great.
So I've been playing Super Mario 3D World, and she's my favorite character in that game as well. And so I knew that I wanted Peach to be like in the comic, and I was just thinking about it from all these different angles. And then I was thinking like, well, what's her relationship with Bowser? Like they hang out all the time. And I was like, oh, well, what if they're just having tea? And what if they're having kind of like a philosophical conversation? And so I sat down. I get a lot of good ideas. So like I've got this structure in my head. And then I go pee, and I'm like, oh yeah, what about death? That's rife with potential. So I'll and so I wound up with what I think is a very solid comic.
But like, how do you? So I'm like drawing straight in. How do you take that idea and then put it on the page? You have everything written out first.
I sometimes I'll write out the text first. Sometimes I'll just have an idea of how the dialogue's going to go. But I always do a 5-minute rough sketch. But you can tell what everything is. And the dialogue will be there, and I show it to fucking everybody I know. And if people like it, then I make it, and if they don't, I don't make it.
See, I would immediately stop after that part, because it's over for me, because I already showed the people I know.
See, I figure then I've tested the demographic, and then I can release it into the wild, and it'll do well with my audience, because my friends like it, and my friends are a similar demographic.
I like to think my audience is my friends. Yeah. No, so how do you do that? I'm talking to you, Rachel.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my comics come from life. I do a lot of journal comics. But I sort of take things that happen and then run with it, like specifically with the Frankie comic. One of the really early ones, there was a strip where, she's trying to get at some food that I'm making, and I'm like, no, go eat your cat food. And then she comes over and like dumps her cat food in the bowl of food that I'm making. And clearly like that didn't actually happen. Taking real life ideas and expanding on them for the joke. Like Dave was talking about, sort of having the base idea and then looking at it from every angle and finessing it and saying, okay, well, what are all the different versions of this joke that I could tell or the story that I could tell? Which way am I going to go? And I do a lot of that as well. We work kind of similarly. It seems from previous conversations that we've had as well, where, I'll do the same thing where I'll write out the basic idea. And if I have the time, I'll also do a really quick sketch of the idea. And I'll usually do a handful of these at a time. I just recently started carrying a small sketchbook around with me so I can do one-off ideas as they pop into my head. For the last couple of years, I'll usually like sit down and come up with, 10 to 15 ideas at a time and write them all out and sketch them all out and then meander off and do something else for a couple of weeks and then come back and actually like go, okay, well, here's my idea. Here's my sketch. Okay, well now I'm going to try and turn that sketch into a thumbnail. Okay, well, what are the 5 different ways that I could lay that strip out to make it work online or on the page? And then I'll thumbnail it, and then I'll pencil it, and then I'll ink it, and so on. But it's like, it's a multi-layered process to go from the idea to the final
Yeah, so that
art.
sketchbook thing is kind of a really important thing I wanted to bring up when I read this, because like I used to just sit down and try to draw a comic, and like I cannot do that. Like when I say like I sit down and like I start drawing into the page, that thing in the first panel is almost always something out of a little moleskin I've got in my pocket that I just redraw. Like I don't write things ahead of time, but as I'm walking around, I'm constantly like jotting little sketches. So like when I sit down to draw, like if I'm just staring at a blank page, I can't do anything. Like I lock up. But if I pop out my little moleskin, I did a little doodle of guys trying to hang a frame, like a guy I saw stealing a candy bar, or like things like that. And then I just jump off from there. And like sometimes I'll like try to find the twist in it, but that little seed from the sketchbook is important.
I agree that starting with a blank page is a nightmare. Sometimes I don't draw stuff out ahead of time at all, but I'll have like one sentence where I'm like, oh, that's kind of a funny premise or whatever, and I'll start with that. Sometimes I will sit down to draw, and I'll sit down in the coffee shop, and sometimes I'll be inspired by what's going on around me. Sometimes I'll just write down what's been happening for the past week, and it's like your comics, it's very stream of consciousness, but it's not a comic, and it's not intended to be, and sometimes oftentimes a funny idea arises out of that.
Yeah.
It can kickstart myself.
See, when I sit down and try to intentionally draw that out of myself, nothing happens. Like, I can't do that. Like, I have to, like, if I'm on a deadline, like, I have to go wash dishes and, like, hope something happens.
Actually, that's doing things that is not writing is great for writing.
Yeah.
Like, when I've been forgetting to draw little things in that notebook, there's nothing. But, like, throughout the day, if I've got that notebook with me, instead of getting on Instagram, I'll look around, I'll see something, I'll draw it. Like, in this room I'm in right now, like, there's multiple things that are jump-off points, and I can draw them in my sketchbook and then check on those later. But if tonight when I go home and I sit down and say, I'm drawing a page, and I look at a blank page, I'm not going to remember any of those things. It's just not going to happen.
I don't count on myself to remember anything. When I first started, I always was thinking, like, I'll remember that. That's so funny. I'll remember that. I'll remember it. Never.
Yeah.
Never.
No.
Always write it down. And also, like, sometimes I'll be driving. I'll use the voice recorder on my phone and just pitch an idea to myself.
Yeah. So another thing is, like, even if you've got the jokes, a lot of times after you've been doing it for a while, your tone or themes emerge, and you've always got those things you can fall back on. Like, I have so many jokes about dead cut up snakes on the sidewalk. It's so benign, but like, I saw a dead snake once when I was 14, or more specifically, I watched my dad like cut a poisonous snake he found in the yard, like chop its head off, and that shit is recurring. It's sort of like not a funny thing, but that's how I start a lot of jokes now. If I gotta edit that shit out.
Well, no, it's probably really good, but you sound like a robot on this.
Oh,
end, so
yeah, no.
it's fine.
I'm sure that it recorded fine and you sound fine.
I thought I was getting a silence.
But yeah, so
Yeah, I thought I was getting a
themes.
silence for that content. Like, oh, this guy's gonna kill me now.
I was like trying to be cool, like, 'cause I can't tell if he's done talking yet. It's fine. So what about longer form? Do you guys do any longer form?
I say Rachel's in the middle of a giant book.
Rachel's doing a whole graphic novel. So what is your approach to write? So did you had to go to a publisher? Did you pitch them a script?
No, what happened was at the Center for Cartoon Studies, there's an event called Industry Day where editors and agents and that sort of thing come into the school for a day and you give them a packet of work and they're supposed to sit down with you, not to give you work, not to give you a job or hire you, but to say, these are your marketable skills. This is, if you do want to get an agent, if you do want to get a publisher, this is what you should be taking to them. This type of project is good. Your art isn't good yet. Your writing is good. Rachel, your journal comics are great. Your fictional stuff, not so good. That sort of thing. And it just so happened that the woman that I sat down with for Industry Day, or one of the people that I sat down with for Industry Day, was an old friend of mine, Carol Burrell, who is a cartoonist herself and has worked with publishers and was working as an editor at Abrams, who is now my publisher. And she and I we're old acquaintances from doing webcomics around the same time. And I used to make her merchandise for a different publisher that she was working for and that sort of thing. So we knew each other. And it was more like she looked through my work and she asked me what I was doing when I came home, when I graduated. She said, well, what are you doing after graduation? And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to go home and try and get a job in animation. I don't know. Like, I guess I'm moving to LA. I really have no idea. I don't really want to get a day job. And she said, well, let me take this back to my boss. Like, I really like this. I think this is marketable. I like this other thing you're working on. The Frankie comics are great. Like, let me take everything back to Abrams and see if we can find you a project. And as it turned out, they liked the stuff in my packet. One of the short stories in my thesis, they wanted me to expand upon to see if I could do it as a 160-page graphic novel instead of a 13-page short story. So I sort of accidentally pitched to the publisher by sitting down with Carol at this event.
So then what you had a structure then already set up in that 13 pages for the overall story arc.
I had a premise, and I had done it sort of, it wasn't technically one act, but I'd sort of like condensed all the themes and stories into a one act structure for the sake of this short story. That it was something that could easily be expanded upon to do a longer story if I had wanted to. It wasn't my intention with the piece. It was always my intention to do it as a short story, and did it that way. But they wanted to see if I could do the same or something similar in a longer format.
So when you started that, I thought you were going to say, I went to CCS, and there's this thing called Industry Day, where the guy from NBM comes in and makes people cry.
Yeah, that's how that went. That also happened. But that's not what the event is for. That guy was a
chode.
I am interested though. Like, did you write out a script?
I did end up sending them a pitch, just officially, so they could have it on record, even though we had already like unofficially made the deal. And so I sent them the pitch packet. Then we did contract negotiations and the contract, and then I had to send them an outline, which was basically the 3-act breakdown. But it wasn't specific scenes. It was like, so there's character introductions, and we see the protagonist at work, and then she goes to class, and then her boyfriend's introduced, but it wasn't specific scenes or what was specifically happening in the scenes. It was just a really loosey-goosey sort of, this is my general thing that's happening. And then skipping ahead 8 months, my editor got back to me with outline revisions. At that point, I sort of needed to sit down and start drawing. So I didn't think I was going to have time to really pre-write the scenes. And then my editor left the company, and I was assigned a new editor. And then she wanted me to actually write a script. And so then I sat down and tried to write a script within a month for this 160-page book.
Because that makes sense.
Because that's totally a thing that can happen. And I sort of just ended up writing a more detailed version of the outline, where like I was like, okay, well, this is my scene, and these are my page-by-page breakdowns of the scene. So instead of saying we see the character go to class, it's like the protagonist is sitting in her seat watching somebody present. She gets up, she goes to the board, she gives her presentation. These are details, shots that are going to happen during that presentation. And I did it in more of a panel-by-panel, page-by-page breakdown. Mm-hmm. And I managed to get 3/4 of the way through that within a month before I had to actually sit down and start drawing.
In order to get it done.
Yeah, so now I'm just drawing, and I have most of it figured out, but there are spots where I'm just sort of filling in the blanks.
Yeah, it's
like it's terrifying. I'm drawing everything that I know for certain first, like all the really important scenes and sequences that I have 100% solid, I'm doing because I know that they're good. And then I'm going to have to see, okay, well, where am I at? Where are my missing story beats? What can I put here? What's necessary? How can I finesse this? Which is not normally how I would do this. If I could go back in time, what I would do is I would do the outline, I would revise the outline, I would revise the outline again based on my editor's notes, and we would sort of finesse as we went. But I didn't, due to a variety of reasons and just scheduling and miscommunication, like I didn't have that opportunity with my first editor. And then my new editor, my current editor, and we just don't have the time to do it.
So I'm drawing some parallels because I'm also working on a longer form-ish. It's the longest thing I've ever done. It's going to be probably like 30 pages when it's done. And when I first started it, I was like, okay, well, here's my arc. I had an outline. And I said, yeah, this is going to be perfect. This is going to be great. And I thought it was going to be 5 pages. And then I got to page 5, and I was like, wow, this is not even halfway through Act 1. Holy shit. So I had to sit down and really outline things properly. And I'm releasing as they go, so I do 1 page at a time. It's a very linear progression. It's been very difficult to maintain quality because I am writing it as I go, and some days I feel great and I want to write, and some days I feel like shit and I want to die. So
yeah, that's a normal part of the process. That's healthy.
Okay.
So can I recommend 2 sources, like books I found that talk specifically on how to arrange these ideas in a story together, like an outline? Like, so there's one book that was recommended in the year I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies with you that was recommended by one of our teachers, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, that I promptly ignored and did not read until like this year, because I guess I'm too smart or something. But it's basically, it talks about all the parallels historically in like different stories.
It talks about the hero's journey,
and
right?
just like the basic order that stories generally tend to take, and like you can break it and mess with it, but it's a really good, like, solid, like, outline from a guy who like has read every type of story.
I'm a big fan of the hero's journey, and specifically the hero's journey within the 3-act structure, because it gives me parameters to work in.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people are trying to break that structure now. You know, people are complaining about movies specifically, like, 20 minutes, we know the first act is over. 45 minutes, we know that this thing happens. But, let's try and do a 4-act structure instead of a 3-act structure. And, I think playing with it is great and fine. I'm excited to see the things that people are making. But for me as a creator, like, I'm going to hold on tight, to the hero's journey into 3-act, because, like,
I need to do what I know first. Like, I need to get comfortable with just a 3-act structure first before I start breaking the rules.
I'm a pretty artsy-fartsy guy, but like, and I fully encourage people to experiment, but every time I see something that plays with it, it becomes almost unwatchable. It's very rare that something plays with the regular storytelling structure, that it turns out better than it would have been not that way. I mean, there are examples of things, but most of the time it's like, if you would have just played this shit in order, it would have been much better. Like,
I've been working with Dan Harmon's Story Circle. I'm a big fan of Dan Harmon, and so the way that he presents it is very understandable to me.
Also, another book, before I forget, Save the Cat. It's like on screenwriting, and it's written by the dude who wrote Blank Check. Like, it's really
I've heard of that.
It's so fucking corny and unbearable to read, but it turned a lot of shit around in my mind, and like, it's like really based around like selling stuff to Hollywood. But, like, if you kind of ignore that and, like, take the rules you want out of it, it's so fucking helpful.
To some degree, I think that's important anyway, the idea of selling to Hollywood. Not that we're doing that, but it has an air of accessibility about it.
Yeah, it looked like Rachel was about to say something.
I was going to ask if you were saying Dan Harmon. I was going to ask if that was Dan Harmon of Harmontown. But then I didn't have a follow-up for that. I was just curious.
Yeah, Dan Harmon of Harmontown, and he does Community, and he's done a bunch of cool stuff. That I just really like the way that his brain works, so I find it relatable, the way that he presents these ideas.
So, like, but, like, even with, like, the way you structure things, like, I think it's really important to have, like, a good, like, theme or starting point for your ideas. Like, whether it's just, like, I don't know how to phrase this, but, like, I think it's really important to have, like, a general theme, for lack of a better term, brand, that people know what they're getting when they come to you, and to, like, not stray from it too much. Like, when I write comics, a lot of times I'll throw shit out if it's too malicious, the ideas, like, or too vulgar.
Yeah, I don't like mean comics.
If you come to me and you see that, that's not what you're expecting.
Right. So you do need to stay on brand. I agree.
Well, I feel like I agree. But I feel like that doesn't mean that you can't create those works. It's just you have to choose what you're putting out into the world and selling to people, and you could have a second moniker to do the other work. You could have multiple pen names and still do multiple different things. There's a lot of people that will do, I want to say all ages, but then that makes it sound like I'm saying children's books, but they'll do like all ages work, and then they'll also do erotica, or pornography or whatever, and they'll just use 2 different names, and people know that it's the same person, that like if they're doing stuff for children, the children aren't going to accidentally stumble upon porn.
Well, I mean,
you know,
like I'm not specifically talking about that because like people tend to have the same tone in their pornographic work as they do in their like regular stuff, but like more specifically like with webcomics, I find a lot of webcomics suffer from being very, very, very fucking funny, but at the end of the day, there's no reason for me to go back to them specifically because there's no general theme or tone to their work. There's nothing specifically them in their work, if you know what I mean. Like, if you see an Akewood strip, it doesn't matter what that dude was talking about, it's always his tone and his theme. Or, like, if you go to, like, Gun Show, it's always going to be something very specific no matter what the topic is.
Consistency throughout the project.
And not just consistency of quality, but, like, consistency of tone.
Well, I think that's a matter of finding your voice.
That's what I was thinking.
I don't think that's something that you can force, but I do think that that's something that's important to have.
It will come with time. It just comes automatic.
But there are some, like, much older webcomics that, like, I won't name names, but, like, I'll go to their things, or, like, I'll see them on, like, Reddit or something, and I'll be like, ha, this is really funny, and I'll, like, scroll through a couple, and, like, they're all very funny, but there's not, like, an overarching, like, soul to the work.
I don't necessarily need that. I don't, because we're not naming names, I don't really know what you're talking about specifically, but if I like a comic and I see a few in a row that are, like, solid, I'll usually give them a like on Facebook and keep an eye on them.
The thing is, there's so much stuff that's out there. Like, I'm not going to follow every single thing I think is funny. Like, it has to have, like, a very specific voice that, like, speaks to me. Not to get too artsy-fartsy.
So, like, kind of, I don't know, I'm working on this short story about kind of the importance of money or the lack of importance of money and that sort of thing. And it's not thematically anything that I've done before, but I do think that it's got my voice. It's got that kind of insanity that I like to bring to the table.
Can I be so bold as to say what I feel your voice is? I feel that the overarching theme in your work is the person who gets undeservedly lucky and then life kicks them in the teeth back to where they belong. Like, I feel like that's a continuing theme, is like a lot of your autobio stuff seems to be of sort of like a self-depreciating tone of like, I'm a wise guy and check out this pretty lady I'm with, and then the pretty lady leaves because you're a fucking wise guy.
Sure. Well, that's where it's, I mean, honestly, my tone has evolved like all
like
a lot of what was in my first book is like that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's your work tends to deal with some level of, like, karma. You know what I mean?
I've never thought of it that way. But
well, that's how I view work. That's what I'm saying. Is like, that's something I very specifically look for in works, is, like, an overarching theme that I care about. I feel way too lucky.
Well, then there's also, it's worth considering, like, what does the writer think their theme or tone is, and then how do people interpret it in the disparity there?
Yeah.
Like, how do you even gauge that? Like, your interpretation of my work is probably much different than mine. And I've had a lot of people, like, when I have people do guest comics, it's happened a few times, and it's very unsettling, actually, that they kind of do, like, rapey jokes, and I don't even like the term, but it's like very, it's like, I guess I kind of sort of coming from, but I've never touched anything like that. Yeah, like, I try very hard to stay away from anything like that. So then, like, what do they think of my work that they're kind of going that direction with it? It's very weird to me and scary.
I think, like, you have, like, your view of yourself that you present is, like, a very sort of, like, false confidence ladies' man tone, you know what I mean? But, like, I feel like, that's the thing, is, like, I think they might just have, like, a sort of a shallow interpretation of what that means. Like, I don't think it's, like, I think the idea is, like, it's not malicious. Like, it's never pushing for something.
Yeah, that's always been my intent.
Yeah, so we said a lot of stuff about that. You guys want to do, Alex, is that all we have to say about that?
I'm trying to think if there's anything that we didn't really cover as regards coming up with ideas, writing.
Here's something. Almost every single one of my comics over the last few weeks has been something. So I work in a place with people that I talk to. A good thing is, anytime I intentionally walk up to somebody and start a conversation about something, that's something I care about and want to write about. And if you can keep track of, like, the conversations you're starting, like, a lot of those things are things you want to talk about. And they're probably funny because you care enough about them to walk up to somebody and talk about them.
That's very interesting,
actually. Or, like, just things that are happening. Like, the Rabbit comic I did where, like, he's, like, on the all-carrot diet. A guy named Josh, who I work with, who is a beautiful man, is on a no-carb diet right now. And the Rabbit is just him. Like, that's him. That's how I draw him. So, but like I would say like 99% of the things I draw are somewhat autobiographical, regardless of how obscene and weird they can get. Like,
I think that's kind of true for a lot of creators. Like even in my Peach Bowser comic, it's all me, you know. I don't know. I'm kind of projecting onto these characters in some ways. Although you should try not to as a writer, I guess.
Why not?
Kind of.
Well, but I mean, it goes back to relatability, though. You know, if you try and create something that's not you at all, it's likely to come off as false.
That's true. You can tell honesty in writing.
That's what I think I'm talking about in a lot of these webcomics. They're very funny, but they tend to, it feels like they're pandering to anything that would work for most people. And by pandering and attempting to lock into people, they're not locking on one audience or one voice.
And it's that's an appealing thing to do because you can get a lot of views to your website that way or whatever.
For a good video game comic, you can get 20,000 Reddit hits, but not one of those people is going to come back if every single one of your pages is not about video game.
That's mostly true.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one more thing about writing that I think is like the most important thing that I think a lot of people don't realize or recognize. And it's been said a million times before, but inspiration is bullshit.
That shit does not exist.
Don't rely on inspiration. It doesn't exist. You can get inspired, but you can't ever count on it.
Yeah.
That's all I had to say about that.
You know, what's the Mike? You'll know this. What's the quote where they say inspiration is for suckers, the rest of us to show up?
Yeah, something like that. I was thinking good art is 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. But your thing is good too. How is your thing the snarky one? That's supposed to be my job. Yeah. No, they're both true. Yeah.
You gotta work hard for good ideas. That's it.
That's the thing is, like, I have written things attempting to pander to audiences, just to like, not like to do it, but to like sort of prove you can do it, and it almost always works. Mm-hmm. But I never benefit from it, and my core audience almost always hates it.
I think you can get a good balance. I truly do, because I am pandering in a lot of my comics. Like, I did a Seinfeld comic. I was pandering because I wanted to get page views, but I love Seinfeld, and I love that comic, and I gave it an honest.
But the thing is,
if you know the content, if you like Seinfeld, like, then it's not really pandering then.
Yeah.
It is to a point, but it's like, it's still something that you like, that you're semi-passionate about, or that you have some knowledge of. It's not like you're completely unaware of Seinfeld. It's not like you're like, oh, well, I know Seinfeld will get me page views, you know, let's make a Seinfeld comic, but I don't actually know anything about Seinfeld. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So pandering necessitates dishonesty.
Yeah, like, what I'm saying is, I know for a fact that there's a huge grip of cartoonists who, when they sit down to write, what they do, the first thing they do is they hit the front page of Reddit and pick a topic off there, because that's what people like. And you can always tell when people are doing that, and like, or something to that effect, and it is an insane percentage of people. A lot of the times it's really funny, but it feels like I'm being sold to.
Don't sell a vacuum cleaner to people, kids.
I need a vacuum cleaner so bad right now. Yeah, you guys want to get over to the next email we got?
Yeah.
This next email says, "Hey Mike and Rachel and Dave, I'm almost done with a big old comic, and I want to be able to put it on my computer and edit it with the tones and what's not. All the zines I've done before have been made by going to Kinko's and just scanning junk I've drawn on printer paper. So I was wondering if you had any recommendations on scanners and software. Thanks, and congratulations on the podcast, and happy birthday, Mike. Much respect, Alex Lobsher."
Happy birthday, Mike.
This was my birthday like a week ago. This email is late. I guess it was probably a week ago.
I didn't get a chance to say
Well,
so.
I had a great birthday, and a happy birthday to you too. Because I know it's your birthday right now.
Back in September, but it still counts.
But yeah, and this is Alec Lobsher, who is an adorable younger cartoonist who came out to see me and Rachel at Mocha.
I also had the pleasure of
that guy is a lovely guy.
Hey Alex, you're adorable, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at next Mocha.
I also like, what do we say about scanners? Because I actually need a scanner right now because mine is broken.
I was going to say, what happened to your scanner? Okay. Why is it broken? Let us not recommend that one. But I've also seen you put your scanner in your backpack and throw it in the back of your van,
it's a car now.
Truck, whatever the hell that thing is.
It's a car now.
That is full of boxes and dogs and hay. So I don't think that maybe your scanner breaking is your
No,
scanner's
okay,
fault.
so that scanner broke because of my fault, but the scanner I'm currently using broke because I put okay, so like it's an 8.5 by 11 scanner, and I draw on 9 by 12 paper. So I pretty much put the paper on and throw a bunch of books on top of it to like smash the paper up against the glass. And the glass has slowly warped to where now there's a small blurry line across like 2 inches wide across the center of any scan. And I didn't notice it for like the last 20 days scans, and I had to go back and rescan it because there's just like it gradually gets blurrier in the middle.
I know nothing about scanners, but it sounds like first thing, get the right size for what you need.
That's a problem, but
I have a recommendation if anybody can find one of
Yeah.
these. Is I have an Epson GT 15,000,
Yeah.
and it's an 11 by 17 scanner, and that size is really, really hard to find.
they're all like
these days.
$900.
No, the thing was this one was retailing at the time for almost $2,000 when it came out. And I waited a couple of years and managed to find a refurbished one for like $800. And this was almost a decade ago. And it's the best investment that I've ever made. Like up until 6 months ago when I got a color printer, like this was my very, very favorite piece of equipment that I own, like to make comics. Like it's very
Before I
important to
forget,
me.
Canon has an all-in-one crappy inkjet printer with an 11 by 17 scanner on it for under $300. I saw this
Oh, well, there you
in
go.
Office Max the other day, and I was like, what? But you cannot find 11 by 17 ones cheaper than that without a crappy inkjet printer attached to it. So I don't know if I'll have a print on it, but I think I might have to get one of those. Ooh, what I would do is I would have a friend named Max Riffner, who is an amazing cartoonist, offer to give you one on Twitter, and he's a beautiful man because he's going to send me a scanner.
Oh,
Wow.
man. Max is wonderful. I was just thinking of him the other day.
If you're willing to like do it in 2 scans, there's a thing called photo merge on Photoshop where you can scan it in 2 parts, and Photoshop will automatically line it up for you into one file.
What version of Photoshop
The
are
new
you
one,
on?
because I pay for it. Don't steal it off the internet.
Oh, dang. Yeah, no, I'm on
Yeah.
like CS2 and CS4. Like,
Yeah,
there's
if you
no way.
use your like,
CS4's alright.
there's.
I think it's got photo merge.
But does it have photo merge?
I think it does.
I know
Really?
this
I
is
could
a
be
thing I
wrong.
used to do by hand that I do know has existed for a long time.
That is how much overhead does that, like time overhead does that
I mean, it takes a few minutes to load, but I'm also on a computer that I fixed by putting the motherboard in the oven, so like time issues don't really count on my computer. Like everything takes time.
I meant in general, like having to do 2 scans and stuff. I'm very nitpicky about all the little things that will make your process
Yeah,
slow.
I think if I had a more appropriate scanner, my life would be a lot easier. Like I can draw a page a day, no problem. If you ask me to scan a page a day, that's where the issue comes in. I'll build up like 30 pages and like be late on a week's worth of comics just because I don't want to scan, which I should probably stop doing.
So what's the moral of the story here?
Get an appropriate scanner. But yeah, like just a regular scanner.
We don't know.
I have not figured out the moral of the story yet, but when I figure it out, I will put it into practice. No, like, but what do we use to? Everybody here uses Photoshop to prep their files, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All my final things.
Yeah. You can do wonders with Photoshop, but like, do we have anything to say about prepping files in Photoshop?
I mean,
Like,
that's something that I'd rather make a tutorial for than try and cover
Yeah,
in a
that would work.
podcast.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Alex.
So sorry, Alex.
Alex, let's get on Skype sometime and
Yeah.
screen share.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Yeah. Actually, we should do an Inkpit tutorial to how to process pages. Can we do that? Let's
Yeah,
do
we
that.
should.
Let's do that.
Let's
We're
do
posting it next week. Do you guys want to do? That was a joke. We're not posting it next week. I should probably.
Rachel's eyes got so
Yeah, I should
wide.
probably clarify that that's a joke. But we should do that. But should we read another email?
I'd be down for another email.
don't know,
What else we got? I can pull it up on my phone.
Alright.
Let's see what we got.
So I'm not good at reading things.
Mike, if you have that printed out, you should actually
You should read the email
though.
because I read the other ones. But also, you should wait a minute because somebody's making a salad in here.
Okay, are we
In a
ready?
minute.
We have an email from Oscar Chavez, and Oscar writes, as for my question, I skipped ahead, but how do each of you see yourselves in regards to being cartoonists professionally? if you identify that way at all, that is. I know some people who draw comics also do other things and identify as something else. Also, how difficult was the transition from working wherever it was you worked before drawing comics for a living?
Who's starting that off? Rachel.
You do it.
No.
You read the question.
Oh yeah, I guess that means that I lead. I see myself sort of as a budding comics professional. Like, I feel like I'm about to turn that corner, but I haven't quite done it yet, if that makes sense. I've been making comics semi-regularly for the last decade, but I'm just now starting to learn how to utilize my network to actually get me paying jobs and jobs that I would like to work on. So I would say that I guess I'm a comics professional, but I'm still pretty green.
You did a cover for Adventure Time, you did Garfield. I think that's a profession.
Well, right, but it's one of those each things. Like, I did a variant cover for Adventure Time, one of those things. I've done one backup story for Garfield. I'm working on my first real graphic novel. Like, I'm just starting to turn that corner. Like, I'm not doing regular backup series. I haven't done my own mini series. The graphic novel that I'm working on isn't out yet, you know?
You're definitely...
and so...
Oh, I'm just saying, you're definitely, like, in that door, and you've got... I'd say you're a professional with how many conventions you do. I think this may be a matter of, like, internal perspective versus goals.
And I think that that's what it is. Lucy Bellwood and I had this conversation at, I guess it was TCAF? Mocha? At one of those shows when I was back
That's
east,
what I'm saying. Like,
about this.
Was I at TCAF or Mocha? That sounds like a professional talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think you're right. It comes down to perspective and goals. Like, I'm definitely professional when it comes to, like, the convention circuit. Like, I am well seasoned and I know how to do that. But, I think of it in sort of also like readership and paying my bills and, goals for projects. I would love to be a year from now where the Frankie book is out, like the large collection is out, and that's through a publisher, and where a little bit more of my student loan debt is paid off, and like, I'm not hitting up Boom every month going, hey, so that backup story I pitched, has that been approved yet? Hey, how about now? I'm really looking forward to drawing those 4 pages and getting that comic publisher money.
I would assume, like, most of our listeners, like, the fact that you're emailing Boom, hey, how about that backup story I pitched, means a lot.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, and it does. It most definitely does. If you'd asked me even 2 years ago, who do you want to work for? Like, when will you consider yourself a professional? I would say when I've done a variant cover for Adventure Time.
Yeah.
So 2 years ago, me thinks that me today is a professional. Me today thinks that me a year from now is a professional.
I think that's
I've got some issues with perspective for sure. But as to like things that I did before I was cartooning full time, I've kind of done art full time for the last decade, which is incredible. And I've done it very, very meagerly. I've definitely been on or below the poverty line for the state of California for the last decade. And always chasing my tail financially, but that's a choice that I'm making in order to do comics full time. It's not something that I would recommend living without
the trick with the poverty line, I find, is to not try to jump up and reach it, but to try to limbo under it.
Yeah,
just under.
I think that's the
safest.
But like, you used to do caricature stuff.
I did. Back when I was in college, I was working full time doing caricatures in theme parks, and that was how I was paying my bills. Was I was doing that. But at the same time, this is when I was like 18, 19 years old. So, oh my God, 10 years ago. I was working full time as a caricaturist. But at the same time, while I was doing that, I was self-publishing comics on the web. I was selling mini comics at conventions. I was also, running a company called Mod Buttons, where we made custom like lapel pins for other artists and companies and people that sold at conventions. Like, we did buttons for John Fluvog shoes and the Vampire Freaks website. And I got stories about that, but I'll tell you that later. I'm trying to think of other big companies. Saddle Creek Records we did buttons for. We were doing hundreds of thousands of buttons a year for other people in order to finance making comics and getting to conventions and selling shirts and buttons and mini comics at conventions. So I had a full-time day job. I was in college full time taking 6 classes, which was crazy, and also running Mod Buttons and also making comics. I did that for 7 years.
Yeah.
And,
there's a distinct difference in ego between you and I, because you've been making comics professionally for, I would say, 10 years. You've been going to conventions and stuff. I went to my first convention like a year and a half.
Was that Mocha?
Like, I'm
Oh.
no, it was I would consider myself a professional because it's my primary source of income is comics. So I'm just going with that.
Well, and I think that's the distinct difference. Comics, for up until a year ago, comics was not my primary source of income. And so while it's something that I've been doing regularly this entire time, it wasn't the comics that was paying my bills. And I think that that's the difference in my mind. And that's why I still don't consider myself a full-fledged professional, because I haven't turned that corner yet. Whereas, like, I do think that you're a professional for that reason. And I think for me personally, that's the difference.
Dave, you said your primary source of income is comics. I was actually talking to Rachel about that. Like, what were you doing before the comics?
Yeah, so when I started the comic, I was a waiter, a very good one, but it wasn't really my calling. And then I started doing the comic, and I started applying at game companies because I have a degree in game art and design. So I started applying at game companies all over the place, and I wasn't even attaching resumes. I was attaching links to my shitty comic. Back then, it was really not that good. And one local company really liked what I was doing and actually hired me as a coder. So I worked for them as a coder for a year, and then I moved on to art tech, and I was doing that for a year or two. And then they did like a big layoff, and I left. And since then, actually, it was right after Mocha, and I had such a good time at Mocha. And then I got home on Monday, and they were like, "Hey, so everybody's fired." And I was like, "Awesome." Yeah. So I was like, "Well, I did great at Mocha, so I'm fine now. I can do this." And I have been. I've been doing a lot of commissions for college humor.
So that's the thing is, like, I think the idea of like what making a living means is very different for different people. Like, this thing is like, if you're willing to like not live on much, like, for instance, I live in a shack in the woods in Arkansas, and I make my money on comics, but like Rachel's idea of like a professional is like doing these stories for Boom and having like this regular work. But a few years ago, Rachel essentially finagled me into a tryout to basically draw for regular show, and I did not get it. And like every day, I'm very happy about that because, like, number one, like, I didn't get it for very good reasons. Shortly after that, I started doing Teen Wizard, and that's when I started making my money on comics. Like, I was paying my rent in Philadelphia just self-publishing this thing called Teen Wizard that was terrible. But, like, I never would have been able to do that if I got that regular show job, and I would not have been able to pay rent just off that. If I, like, do you think I would have?
I think you would have. I mean, I know what their page rates are, and I know what I have some idea of what your expenses were, and I think you would have been able to.
It is, keeping your costs low is huge. I live on a farm, and, like, my rent is dirt cheap because I help out on the farm, and so...
Okay, you guys, I need to move to Middle America. Like, this is...
East Coast, I'm in Connecticut.
I moved to Arkansas from Philadelphia just because, like, I wanted to have more of that money that I was spending on rent and stuff. And coincidentally, since I needed less money, I started doing less work. But, like, I'm living in, like, a house owned by one of my relatives that is the worst house with no heat ever. But I have chickens, so that's nice.
Cool. We have cows.
Yeah, I want to see a cow.
That's as exotic as a apartment.
You need to move to the middle of nowhere, because you can still go other places for conventions. And, like, in town, in a nice, decent town, rent on a house is like $600 a month.
And that's amazing. I mean, speaking candidly, like, this doesn't have to stay in the podcast. It doesn't really matter. But the bulk of my expenses come not from rent and living expenses of being in LA. They come from, like, my student loans. Like, that's a third of my monthly expenses. So, you know, realistically, even moving to the middle of nowhere, which I think would help, you know, isn't really going to solve the problem yet until I can get some of that debt paid down.
For a while, I was calling the president of my online college, and I was just calling him up and being like, "Hey, I want my money back.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Did it
He's
work?
like, no, we can't do it. And I would call him every couple of weeks and be like, any thoughts on me getting my money back?
So, speaking candidly, probably not going into the podcast, the Center for Cartoon Studies, I basically had a whole bunch of money saved up, and I just gave it to them and said, yeah, I'll pay you the rest. And, like, there was, like, no loan situation figured out, and I've just been sort of, for, like, the last 2 years. Like, and they're so nice about it. They'll just send me an email every few months, like, hey, you want to give us some money? And I'm like, I don't have any. The good news...
See, I wish I could tell Sally Mae that and just be like, hey, so I know I owe you guys some money. I don't have it. Like,
I've tried barking up that tree.
No,
too,
as anti-educational institution as I am, Center for Cartoon Studies has been fucking beautiful to me over my lack of financial situation.
Sally Mae is a terrible
nightmare. They helped me out a lot too during my second year.
They are a beautiful institution in that regard, regardless of my opinions on whether you can teach somebody art or not. Which is, I'm coming around on it. I gotta be snarky about something. Yeah.
So should we wrap up? Did we do it?
I think we just did a podcast.
I think we did it.
I think that happened.
Not bad. I think we did a good job too.
No, I learned some things about you guys. I learned some things about myself. So I hope you guys learned some stuff about me.
I learned some stuff about Rachel, but not you.
Mike, I know everything about you.
So, but yeah, okay, so here's what we're going to do. On 3, we're going to say nailed it and hang up, right?
Alright, I love it.
1, 2, 3. Nailed it.
Nailed
and
it.
Hang up. Dave hung up. Dave hung up. Now let's just talk about Dave for 10 minutes.
Dave's amazing. I can't believe he makes all the money on comics.
So I personally, what I like about Dave is his mustache and also his great
lovely.
voice. Oh, okay. So what else can we say about Dave while he's not here?
I don't know, dude.
I like
I'm
his
gonna hang up.
comics. All right. I love you guys. Bye.
Bye.